I got to keep moving in here. And this is an important place for me. My journey into Mennonite history started right here in this museum. Ernie mentioned the day that I gave him a call, and I was really just researching on my own, and I walked in here, and I didn't have any connections really in the Mennonite history world, and I walked up to, I think, Untitled Wiebe, her name was, and is that you? Right on, it's good to see you. And I showed her what I had, and she was impressed and took it seriously, and I think you called someone that worked in the windmill here, one of Ernie's cousins, and then he gave me Ernie's number, and I called Ernie, and like he said, it's all history from there. So that was great, and this is an important place for me. So, we already heard the question asked and some answers given. What's important about maps? That's what I'm here to talk about. And try to stay close here to the mic. We're going to look at some maps today. All the maps are from the 18th and 19th century. And if we ask ourselves, I'm going to give an answer to this question as well. If we look at Britannica.com, defines cartography, which is the study of maps. It defines it as the art and science of displaying geographical locations on a flat surface. And that's interesting to me, that cartography is both an art and a science. And a 2014 article from BBC says that maps not only record our perception of reality, they create our perception of reality. So maps are powerful if they create our perception of reality. So we look to art and science to give us important information about politics, history, and geography. So today we're going to start by looking at some 19th century maps that tell the story of Mennonites. And what's different about these maps? Some of them will be new to us. I'm introducing two series today. One is we're somewhat familiar with, and the second will be almost entirely new. But the point is, these are telling the story of the Mennonites through the Russian perspective. It's a little different than when we draw our own maps. And I'm going to try to give some detail about that. The things we highlight and the way we present our reality is a little bit different than when it's part of a huge imperial military mapping project. So the first set of maps we're going to look at briefly is called the General Survey of Russia. And we know that Catherine the Great invited our forefathers to Russia. And of course, part of that was she had to create maps to document the state lands and which lands could be for sale, where we would move. So mapping was, you could say, the foundation of our being able to move there. So the maps we're going to look at have some really interesting information that previously we would probably just look in some of the Mennonite history books. So these give us some primary source documents that show how the Russians viewed this land. And some points that I highlighted here are, it was called the General Survey of Russia, just so that we can get the terminology right. They show the usability of land and who owned it. And in the notes, we can see that even the imperial government had to distinguish between Frisian and Flemish Mennonites. And they were established under Catherine the Great. So the first ones we'll look at relate to the first place of settlement in the late 1700s. Here we see an example of the General Survey of Russia. This kind of green map, we can see the Dnieper River. I'm going to put on the laser pointer here. So this area right here is the place, the first settlement here was the Hortica. This portion of land right here this is what it looked like. We can see it had topographical information, and more importantly, it showed the usability of the land, and it had a number right in the middle. We'll go to the next one to look at that. Here we can see a number, and these are the names of the villages. I added English names. And this number corresponds with surveys, notebooks. And of course these are all in Russian, so it's a challenge to find them, but they're available online. And you can read the surveyor's notebooks of what they wrote about this land, who it belonged to, how much was usable, and some descriptions of this land. So this map is from 1790, and if we look on the left, we can see the village of Hortica and Rosenthal. They're right down here. And then up here we can see a zoomed in version. And so for the village of Hortica, we can even see the individual houses from some of the first settlers there. So that's really incredible when we look at how that was mapped out. And now we're going to look at those in a little more detail. This is some examples of the portions of land from we could call it the Old Colony, of the General Survey map. This here is an extract from one of the survey books. It's written in Russian. It has what area of land was usable, what area was not usable, and a description of the land. This is a description of the island and the rights that the Mennonites had to that island. So here's an example. Here we have portion number, there's another number here, I can't quite make it out here, 74 I think, or 76. And it is the next piece of land that we bought. And interestingly, at the time of the survey, it did not yet belong to the Mennonites. So we can see that brief interlude between the first settlement and the second purchase of land. So it still belonged to Russian. We can read in the description. And so this third one here shows Schönwiese across the river. And it also has a number, and the accompanying notes describe it as land belonging to the Frisian Mennonites. So on the other side was Flemish, and here we can see even the surveyors recognize the importance of this division between the Flemish and the Frisian Mennonites, and that's recorded in their notes, is the Frisian versus the Flemish. If we look in close here, we can see sort of a star-shaped structure here. This is another map of it, and that is Alexandrovsk Fortress. So when the first settlers moved there, they weren't too happy about the land they'd been given. As we may know from the story, they had been expected to move elsewhere, and at the last minute were redirected to this Zaporozhye area. And I don't know how many, but many spent the first winter in this fortress. Of course, after that, some went out to build their new homes, and there were some that decided they weren't leaving. They were going to stay right there in that fortress. But the owner there would have none of that and sent them out anyways to get on with starting their settlement. So that map is part of the General Survey of Russia, started by Catherine the Great and carried on after her. And it's very important it relates to the initial settlement of the Old Colony. And now, after this, we're going to look at the same map for the Malaysia Colony, which I only recently found, and it's also of interest because it relates to the initial settlement of the Malaysia Colony. So those of us who have roots in the Kleine Gemeinde, like me, in the Holdeman and Kleine Gemeinde, most of our forefathers go back to this Malaysia area. So what are we going to see in this Russian map? Remember, it's not us telling our story, it's Russians documenting it. But there's some things of importance that we're going to be able to tell in this map. One is sheep raising. In the 1830s, which is when this map is from, sheep raising was a very important part of the Mennonite life. We're already going to tell from this imperial map who was important, and that was Johann Cornes. Even from this map, his importance is clearly visible. I don't know if we all are familiar with who he is, but some call him they call him lots of things. In any case, he was a reformer, and he was known for his sternness, but his undying determination to get what he wanted done. And we can see the neighbors. Sometimes when we draw our maps, we don't show our neighbors. And that's okay, because we're trying to show where we live. But often the Malaysia Colony maps you'll see are just kind of they'll show the Mennonite settlement, and you don't really get a picture of who's around it. And we're going to notice one important trade route that passed through the colony. So here we have this map. We can see it's old. It's not in really great quality, but it does document all the villages that were here at this time. And we can see the first settlements up here, and the villages, Halbstadt is up here. And so now, yeah, let's just look at this map a bit. It's just really, it's quite a beautiful old map. It has individual portions and parcels just like the other one. But unfortunately, we don't have access to the survey notes from this one. So at this point, I haven't found them anyways. Someday maybe we'll find them and be able to read more about these individual properties. This is here to highlight some of the points I already mentioned. Here we have the Malaysia Colony. This is the area, so it shows the borders, because remember, this map was made to enable settlers to get along and to understand what we owned. Good fences make good neighbors. And so, I'm not going to be able to zoom in here, but if you did zoom in, you would read community sheep farms. It mentions several sheep farms. So from there, the Russians, we can read from this map that sheep farming was very important, and indeed it was at that, especially in the first half of the century. These lines here also represent an important route, an old trade route, which I'm going to talk more about, they were called the Chumak. And this route caused some stress for the Mennonites because there was concern about the Mennonites' cattle getting diseases from the traders' cattle, because this thing was quite wide. I forget right now if it was a mile or two. I think about a mile wide. But in that scope, there was the right-of-way and the Chumak way, it was called, or sometimes it's called the salt way, because these were salt traders. Long carts of maybe 30 long rows of maybe 30 carts with oxen in front would travel through there. So we can imagine what a sight that was to see these Russian traders or Ukrainian traders heading to all points of the empire, and many of them passed right through the Malaysia Colony here. And they were allowed to graze their cattle on this right-of-way. That was specified. On this map it says, cattle are grazed here. So the Russians are emphasizing that this right-of-way is for grazing cattle, even if that caused the Mennonite stress. And one more very important point here is the estate of the Mennonite, and then my favorite, it says Ivan Cornies. So here, they called him Ivan Cornies, so they gave him a Russian name, but we can see already how important this man was. Other people's names aren't mentioned on here, but here we can see the name of Johann Cornies. And we can see the neighbors, the German colonists. Right up here, the Doukhobors. This was all Doukhobor land at this time. They were living here. And there was another religious group, the Molokan lands. And then there were more of the Ukrainian or Russian people around these sides. But now let's pay attention to how the Russians presented this border right here, because I'm going to go back to it later. This little piece right here, this is the edge of the Molokan lands. This was a type of Christian religion. These were and this is their border. I want us to pay attention to this line right here and to the Chumak line, how it went through here, but then it ended. This right-of-way ended at the borders of the Malaysia Colony. And we're going to get back to that. And now we're going to try to tell the story of this map, this same map shown through a Mennonite perspective. So what we're looking at here is a letter from Johann Wall to Johann Cornies from 1838. And he's telling Mr. Cornies what a nice map he found. And so when I first read this, I was pretty excited too about this map that someone had found from the 1838s, from the 1830s. And it was like reading about a treasure. And I wondered if I'd ever see it or if I'd ever figure out what it was. This teacher, Heinrich Franz, drew this map. And Johann Wall praises up the detail, the churches, the mills, and statistics for the year. And Mr. Cornies makes some comment about that map. And of course, he mentions the mistakes in that map, which is fair enough because the map had some glaring errors. But those errors are what enabled me to identify that map. So he's writing to the state councillor how he's sending several maps Cornys is sending the state councilor several maps, and he's fixed the mistakes on them. Some village is missing. It's interesting to see Cornys wanted to mention some of the Tokmak, Mankila, so some of the burial grounds, the traditional burial grounds of, I think, the indigenous people there, and the German colonist village. So Cornys immediately noticed details outside of the colony that were missing. And now, we're going to look at a copy of that map, which this map has been around for a long time and been known, but by the errors on it, I was able to identify that this must be the map that Cornys was talking about, because it has statistics from the year 1838, it has the same details, and most importantly, it's missing the same things. It's missing that village, it's missing some of the same things. But let's look at, do you remember the line I showed here, down in the corner on that other map? We'll just quickly go back to this one here. Let's look at this line right here. This is the boundary of the Moluccan lands. And I've worked on my maps trying to figure out where that boundary was. And in the past, I always based it on this highly detailed Mennonite map, where it comes right out of the corner. But if we look at that map that's from the same year, then we can see that it's actually up here. So now I want to tie these two maps together. This map has the same errors as this Russian map. So I believe the German map was actually drawn from the Russian map. It seems logical to make that conclusion based on the mistakes that we have here, that the German map was produced from the Russian map. They're from the same year, approximately, from the 1830s. And we can see how the Mennonites, they added a lot of details inside the colony, but once it was outside the colonies, they became actually rather inaccurate. And it seems like Heinrich Franz here, the teacher, just sort of picked a spot where it would look nice to draw a border, and he drew one in there. And he even extended this right-of-way all the way out here. I don't know if it was just, I don't know the details of that, but it looks like it was an error that mostly he was concerned, and logically so, about what was inside the Mennonite colony and the German colony right beside it. And actually quite inaccurate, but pretty. So here we have this art and science, I guess. Art took over once it was outside the boundaries of the Malaysia Colony. And we're going to look at another point of that. So here we're going to compare two spots on these same two maps. So on the right-hand side here, we have the Russian map from the General Survey. And on the left, we have the same, it's a digitally enhanced version, but of the Mennonite map. We can see the Chumak Way, this tradeway, and we can see the village of Tigerweide. And here, beside Tigerweide, we can see a windmill. If we look at this one on the right, there's no windmill. But on the left, it says distillery. And on the left here, there's no distillery. So I don't know the details of why the Mennonites would have left out the brewery and added the windmill. But that's up to each of us to think about. But we also see a pattern here that we're going to keep seeing as we go along, of this perception of more straight lines. When we look at them, when we draw our villages and we tell our story, everything needs to be straight. And so then when we draw our maps, we like to add straight lines, whether it's our villages, whether it's the layout of different things. Like here we can see, it's not wrong. I don't know just why he did it like this. These are the village farmlands, but they definitely give the impression of more straight lines than when we look on this one and kind of see what looks like the land use of probably where they farmed. And so that is the look at we've looked now at the General Survey of Russia, which maps relate to the time of the initial settlement up to the 1830s. So from 1790 to 1830s. Now we're going to look at just a Russian document of a house, because I'm trying to show different ways the Russians have documented our time there. So this house is from 1798, so it's definitely from the old colony and from the initial settlement. pre-Cornies, and we can tell that. It's a beautiful house. Here it says the plan and elevations of what we could call a Mennonite farmhouse in the New Russia area. And we can see it's a wood house with thatched roof, both thatched on both the house and the barn. And it's very similar to later house plans that Cornies would implement, but the window layout is slightly different. Here we have 3 on one side and 2 on the other. So there's again some symmetry that's lacking there. But in general, it's very similar to later maps or later drawings of houses. But here's a nice Russian drawing of a Mennonite house. And here, okay, here's an example of a 3D picture I tried to make of that house. Kind of accurate. And we can see it looks very much like what was built here in Manitoba, especially this is a wooden house, so it's from the early settlement, and thatched, yeah, lots of thatching on both the house and the barn. Another document here that I got from Conrad Stace at the archives, Mennonite Heritage Archives, is this one's a little bit harder to interpret, but it's a sheep building. So we already saw how important sheep farming was. This one says the view from the inside of basically a sheepfold. And it's a blueprint showing the walls and the house where some villager or some workers would have lived, and some elevation views. And this is my 3D model of the sheep barn with the two buildings here, or the 3 sides, and then a wall in front, and the house. And so this would have been built before they used fired bricks, so this would have just been like mud bricks, dried mud stacked together, and it's quite a large complex actually. And it was used for, of course, the sheep, but it was also a place for community service. If someone was, found committing a crime, they could go to the sheep farm to work off their sentence of whatever, I think the one I read was several days of community service on the sheep farm. And so this picture here is also a Russian painting, and the reason I brought it is because, well, I think it's a good picture from a Russian point of view of these traders. This is the Chumak, this painter, Ivazolski, is very, very famous in Russia especially for his paintings of the sea. But I prefer him for his paintings of windmills and lots of paintings showing the Chumak traders. And this is one. These sites would have been common on the Malaysia Colony, these huge convoys of traders passing through. So this painter was, I don't know if I mentioned it, from the Black Sea region. So this was he was from the same area we lived, and this is it's telling part of the story, but from the other side. It kind of idealizes and makes it look beautiful. Whereas we were more concerned about the disease their cattle carried, which was probably a very real concern. And this is my picture, and here I have several references of how the Mennonites interacted with these Chumak traders. And they were important for us. They carried a lot of our supplies. If you can imagine starting a new village, you've got to get the stuff shipped down there. And here we have some examples from Corny's, from the book of Corny's letters, of people communicating about how they shipped their products on these Chumak carts. So this is, again, my picture. I'm trying to show here the settlement of an original village. Let's imagine the Malaysia Colony, because I used topography here from the town of Fisho. So this is about how it looked at the town of Fisho. These are the cliffs across the way, not the cliffs, the hills. And in spring, this water came up and flooded it. And we didn't always get it right. The first village here, we got it the wrong spot and we had to move it. But eventually we did. And so the first thing that would happen is they would send a surveyor to these village sites, and he would mark it out with a plow. So that's what I'm showing here, is a plow on the ground, and they would divide up the workshops, their individual lots, by plowing out a row in the ground there. These are the supplies. That's what I'm showing here is lots of wood would have to be brought in and stuff to build a house. So that is what I'm calling the end of the years of initial settlement. We've looked at those maps, and now we're going to take just a little break away from maps, and we're going to look at, I'm going to talk a little bit about our recent trip. I'm going to have 3 slides on that. We were just in Ukraine and Poland, just got back from there a couple weeks ago. And we're going to go to the Chortitsa Island. So we saw the map, and lots of us are familiar with that, but it's one of the initial places of settlement. So this slide here shows us the Chortitsa Island today. Some of us have been there recently, some of us maybe not. I think there's one Mennonite house left there. This is the house. I think I had to take that over a hedge, but there's one Mennonite house there, and that's on the island. Here we have one of the cemeteries there. Probably many of us have visited there, but there was one thing that really stuck out to me in that cemetery. And Ukrainian, Russian cemeteries are kind of disorderly places. They don't have them like neatly trimmed and everything in rows like we do, but they do have everything partitioned off into square fenced areas. And it was really impressive to me how that our Mennonite tombstones are standing in between those areas, and they're not straight. They're all crooked, and they're actually in the way. They make it difficult to walk. And it made me feel sad. It made me feel kind of out of place. It made me feel almost a sense of discomfort for those tombstones that are blocking the way, and they're standing there crookedly, and yet obviously they're older than all the rest. And I don't know, it brought out some interesting emotions in me. I was surprised to see that. It made me feel kind of bad for them, because I know most of my Mennonite relatives like things to be in order, and most important, not to be a hindrance to someone else. But these are nicely kept. Most of them are cleaned up nicely. You can see people are looking after the Mennonite ones. Another important thing there on the island is all the oak trees. Beautiful trees there. Beautiful trees on the island. And here's another picture of the tombstones. And then here was a walk down, I believe they call it Hepner Valley. So it was right behind I believe the Hepner farm, and it led up to the restored memorial. So when you're on the island there, if you visit the museum, there's a young fellow there. I call him young, he's younger than me, I think. Max Statsky. Probably lots of us are familiar with him. He's been closely involved with this Mennonite tombstone project, where we've probably read in the news about them finding these tombstones under a building and putting them into a memorial. And several of us here have been closely involved with that, and it was really good to see. Because of COVID, they haven't really had any visitors there, from Mennonite visitors. And so we met Max there, and were able to enjoy that memorial. I wouldn't say I helped with the design, but I did help with the visualization of this memorial before it was started. So I was quite involved with that part of it, talking with Max, and it was really great to see this. Finally, all these Mennonite tombstones in nice straight rows, where they were meant to be. It felt good to me to see the work they've gone to create this memorial to those of us to those who lived there and died there. And I won't go into the details of this memorial now, who all is buried there. In the center, they have this anchor, which some of us may know was a common symbol on Mennonite tombstones. Usually it's described to relate to the anchor we have, this hope, the anchor in our faith in Christ. In the time of designing this memorial, there was some discussion about whether there should be these benches there. And some people definitely thought there shouldn't be. And I took this picture of Max and my fellow traveler there, John Entz, sitting and visiting on this bench. And I thought that's a perfect example of why there should be these benches. Here's an American Mennonite and a Ukrainian researcher visiting together in the past, or about things past. And I thought this is a a beautiful example of what this memorial was for, to bring people and past and different generations together. And here we have, here's Max Stotsky, and just a front view of the memorial, the tombstone project there. So Max has put a ton of work into this thing, a lot of manual labor, digging these stones up. When they were taking the building down, they found them, and he's brought them over to his work site, and he has to clean them up, restore them. They're heavy. It's a lot of manual labor. And here is some pictures of where Max works. This is his shop. This is the indoor view of it, the inside view. And an outside view. I took the picture of the door. And what we may not know is there's many, many more tombstones that he hasn't identified yet. There's a whole lot of them, just broken pieces, and it's like a huge puzzle, with 150-pound puzzle pieces that you look at them and you just have to see what will fit where. So that is a little bit of our visit to the Chortitza Island and to the tombstone memorial there that Max Stotsky has worked together with Werner Taves and probably numerous of other ones here. So now we're going to go back into the past, but we're going to visit the 1850s. The years of initial settlement are past in the first main colonies. There's still some villages to be founded, but really Johann Corney's is already gone. His work has sort of peaked, and we're going to try to look at the maps from that era. It's like the height of the maturity, because big changes are coming, but they haven't happened yet. The Mennonites haven't spread all over. They've established the Bergtal Colony and a couple other places, but on this map they're not. The big spreading around, the land crisis hasn't actually happened yet. It's building up. So we're gonna first look at a short animation of what a village would have looked like in those times. It's before the golden years. Mennonites aren't like fantastically wealthy, but problems are coming. There's lots of wealthy and there's lots of land less. And here, let's look at that. Again, my animation of that. It's a little bit. Let's see. Here we can see the brick fences that had already started to be built. And this is just a normal Wirtschaft. It's not an extra rich one, it's just a normal street scene. Trees are already mature. So there we go. Hopefully that gives us a little picture of what it might have looked like. So here we are in the 1850s. Of course, Catherine the Great is long gone, and Nicholas I is the Tsar. And the maps show the peak of the Russian Empire and the peak of Johann Corney's world. It's just before the Crimean War, which was going to have long-term and big effects. In the 1850s, the Nogai people, the indigenous people there, are still living south of the colony. That's all still intact. That was going to change soon, but they're still there. The Bergtal Colony has already been established, and let's just move into this. So here we have two great men, one much greater than the other, of course. He was Tsar Nicholas I. Unless you're a Mennonite, then it's Johann Corney's. And these men had a lot in common. As we start to look at their lives, their values, we can see that they were probably men of the same heart. We read about things like ruthlessness, powerful, and then we start to read about obsession with detail. And that was certainly Corney's. Corney's cared about every last detail, but so did Nicholas I. And there was nothing he wouldn't do. He was an engineer, and there was nothing he wouldn't do to have what he wanted carried out, and Corny's was the same, of course on a smaller scale, but Corny's is known for especially the way he promoted tree planting, and if people decided not to plant trees, that was seen as sort of a rebellion and was treated as rebellion. And an interesting story here, because of my background in the Kleine Gemeinde church got along very well with Corny's. And I'm not exactly sure why, but the Kleine Gemeinde emphasized the need to listen to Corny's because he was the law, it was very important. But Corny's did give them some favors back. He kind of gave them legitimacy as a church. And some of his architectural details he let them not do because they were concerned about worldliness. For example, the building code required the end of a house needed to be all brick, the gable end needed to be brick, but there was concern among the Kleine Gemeinde that was worldly, and they wanted to just do the wall brick and then the rest wood. And for some reason, Corny's gave them permission to do that. So they had they worked well together. But Corny's emphasized hard work and perseverance, and Nicholas I was exactly the same. He came to represent autocracy personified, infinitely majestic, determined and powerful, hard as stone, and relentless as fate. And that description could be made for either one of these men. So now we're going to look at the map that I'm most excited to present today. To me, it's a really exciting thing. As far as I know, it hasn't been viewed by Mennonites before. It's highly detailed, and it was done of the entire European part of the Russian Empire. It was done in the 1850s mostly, and it's extremely accurate. It's done beautifully. It mixes art and science very well, and we're just going to look at some of the details on it. But before I show it to you, I'm going to explain some of the explanations. So each map was made in a square piece. It showed where it was from. Let's go through it here. So okay, here on the bottom is an excerpt of what was underneath each portion of the map. There was a description of the area, like where it was done. This says Yekaterinoslav, Uyezd, so the area around Alexandrovsk, and it has the square, the area, the square dimension in verst and sajin. It has who did it. It was surveyed and drafted by topographer second class under officer Morozov. Remember, this was the Russian military. This was no joke. Everything was done with military precision. The date of the original mapping was April 3rd to June 10, 1853, and it has the scale here, 1 to 40,000. So that means 1 inch, and this is a good way of bringing a Canadian measurement. 1 inch equals 1 kilometer. So we all understand inches and kilometers, right? But for those of us who are familiar with some of the other mapping projects that the Mennonites have done, like Bill Schrader's atlas, when he found these Russian imperial maps from the 1860s, he found them at the Library of Congress, right? They were 1 inch equals 3 kilometers. And they were really great maps, but these are 1 inch equals 1 kilometer, so they're much, much more detailed yet. Next, we see the signatures and ranks of who signed the map, who confirmed it, who checked it, and then there's some information added later. So these maps were done with incredible discipline and detail. And so, I have a flair for drama here, so we'll present the Hortitsa Colony map. So indeed, as we look at this, we can see, I think we'll all agree it's a pretty map. It's definitely got the art. I've drawn in this border here. I overlaid it. This shows the Hortitsa Colony. This is the original settlement. And I've added English names, but other than that, it's all still Russian. So looking at this map, we can see the Dnieper River coming up here. Here's Schönwiese. It's already There's more of a city here than there was in that 1790 map we were looking at. Actually, that map was a little later. But as we look at it on the left here, we're gonna see the towns of Hortica and Rosenthal again, just like on that earlier map. And here, we can see incredible detail of houses and individual buildings, taverns, breweries, just incredible detail. Each town has the name of the town, and then red letters it says how many Wirtschafts, how many lots there were in town. So it has census information on these as well. So these are very valuable maps to researchers. They're nice to look at, but they're also valuable to get lots of information on. Here's the red line showing the railroad. This was added later, if we remember. They documented that they added in a railroad line in, I forget, 1904 was it? A little later anyways. So this is the Hortica Colony, the old colony. And now we're going to take a little look at the Malaysia Colony, an overview. I have paper views of these later, so we can move in closer, look closer on the paper maps in the back. So here again, I've drawn in the borders of the colony. The Russians didn't document these kind of borders very well. They're not shown clearly on this map. So maybe it wasn't so important to them. This was, I guess, topography and villages. It wasn't critical for them to show the border between the Malaysia Colony and the others. But we can see up here the town of Halbstadt. I've zoomed in on it. We can see houses and orchards, and we can see the craftsman's village down here. So this world is very much as Corny's left it. If it's the early 1850s, he's only been gone for a few years. This is, we could say, like Ernie used the word, an X-ray. This is a look at the Mennonite world the way it was when Corny's left. And now, of particular interest again to Mr. Brown here, is the Bergtal Colony. I don't know how many of us have roots in the Bergtal Colony, but this colony hasn't been rich in maps. There haven't been a lot of maps available. But here we can, if we zoom in here to the left, we can see, again, a close-up of the Bergtal Colony, of the village of Bergtal here. And now this is one of my favorite maps. It shows the Mennonites' historic neighbors. And I think it's neat how we had our friends and neighbors there, and many of them moved with us over here to the Canadian prairies. Right here we have Tashnagut or Hutter or estate. This is a Corny's estate. Here we have Huttertal, so we have a Hutterite village. This was Hutterites here. We have Johannesrud, another Hutterite village. And up here we have, it says Hutter, which means estate Verrigan. So this was Doukhobors. It was the Doukhobor estate, and it was called Verrigan. So the Doukhobors, the Hutterites, and the Mennonites were all living together, in very close proximity here. And here we are, years later, living together again on the Canadian prairies. Now a little bit more about these maps. This is the format I get them in. I get them in a digital scan, very high resolution. And then what I have to do is cut off the edges using Photoshop. Of course, I had to learn to use Photoshop, first of all. And there's still lots of room for technical assistance there. So I cut them off, these corners, and then I'll position them together and merge them into one big map. So I might have 20 or 30 of these joined into one big map. And it's good work, but it's sometimes kind of challenging. And then I'll take this so it's going to be a big square picture. It's just on my computer. I don't have it on paper. And then I'm going to go and look at Google satellite imagery, and I'll do what I call georeference. And that means that I take these, it's like I put a pin through this old map, and I put it onto satellite imagery. And of all the maps I've worked with, this map from the 1850s is by far the best. It's much better than later maps from even the the 1900s, or even the stump maps from the 1940s or whenever they were drawn, maybe a little earlier. This is way better. I take it and I just put a few pins and it fits perfectly. So practically speaking, this map, this imagery, was done as well as, like for practical purposes, as Google satellite imagery. It shows individual houses, sometimes, you know, even smaller features, and it's as close to perfect as it possibly could be. It's just incredible. And the guy that gets me these maps, he sent me some pictures of some books he has. So here we see a set of books, and these books are descriptions of each map and the topography. So we could read, we have volumes of books and information about who did each of these and when they were done and under, you know, whose administration. So this is just a fine example of, you know, the Russian Empire and Nicholas I's unbelievable, you know, ability to make things happen and make them happen very well. So now we're going to look in closer here at the Bergtal Colony. We're going back to, we're zooming in on Einlage. As lots of us know, Einlage is now largely underwater. Here, I'm combining a few things together here. We have this ferry. This was a ferry that was the Mennonites administered, and they used it. And yeah, they put a lot of investment into maintaining this ferry, I believe, from their liquor money. They had lots of breweries around here, and they put a lot of money into maintaining this ferry. And here is a picture of what the ferry would have been like. This is, now I've had some conflicting reports on this exact picture. It's either this ferry or the one to the island, but it's right in that vicinity. So, what else can we see here? We can see another drawing from the Russian archives, an architectural, like a design of these ferries, and we can see it's the same style. So, these Russian archives and drawings give us tremendous ability to recreate this world. And that's what I'm excited about. I haven't made a ferry yet, but I want to, and I have, you know, scale drawings here to produce something that's it's very reasonable. It would have been something like this. So, what are we having here? Here we read about the ferry. In this town, we can see a tavern. This little circle with a flag on it means it was a tavern. And taverns were places for traders to stop, where they could water their horses or their oxen, and of course liquor was served too. So we can see taverns right here at the end of the ferry here. And a little side note here is this part was low, this village was low, and Mennonites are famous for giving each other nicknames, and the people from here were known as catfish gnars. I don't know how that went in Low German, maybe someone here knows. But they were known as catfish gnars. That was their nickname for living so low. And now we're going to look at some details on the Malaysia Colony. Again, we're going to look at taverns and inns. And the reason I'm interested in this is because it's not something I knew a lot about. In fact, I hadn't ever really seen anything about it before. And to understand more about the taverns, we need to go back to those Chumak traders. Of course, these taverns and inns didn't only serve them, but they were positioned along the okay, that was a little technical glitch. The taverns and inns were located along that Chumak way. There was one called Three Roses. Yeah, this is taken from a 1907 book. It mentions the Three Roses. That's the only one that had a name, was called Three Roses. And this book tells how long columns of Russian wagons were often seen moving along the Chumak way. So we know the Malaysia world was kind of a closed Mennonite world. But right through that, through the heart of the Malaysia Colony, there were several veins where many, many Russian traders would make their way through. So this is what we see when we look for here. Oh, look at that. Well, just give me a minute. let's try that. Here we have some references from a diary, also from the same era, 1854. And I found the diary was quite enlightening. They gave us a description of how these taverns were used. The first one we read about a little trip they made, and it says, we arrived at the Three Roses, we fed the horses and had a snack. So we can see it was like a restaurant. But we also can see, they make reference to, it says, Jacob Wiebe is moving to the Three Roses. No doubt they will not be without thorns. So we can see that moving to the tavern had the type of, well, the consequences you might expect. So again, up by Tigerweida, we can see a tavern right here. This is where that earlier map showed a brewery. And this seems a logical place to stop with your oxen. Oh yeah, sorry. Thank you. Here we can see, by Tigerweida, we can see a tavern. There was one by Kleefeld and one by Steinfeld. So about halfway through, if they were going this way, they could stop and find a place to, feed and water their horses and themselves. And the same thing on this other wide right of way. And again, the Russian archives give us, there were detailed instructions on how to build taverns that were along these kind of roads that were called tracts. So this was a tractier. It was the type of guest house or tavern that you would build along a tractier. So everything was spelled out for them, and it allows us to picture what this could have looked like. We don't know for sure, but it would have been something like this. And this hasn't got a lot of attention. I think we're going to be reading about Mennonites and alcohol in the next preservings, and maybe we can keep this in mind when we see that come out. So now another point relating to this map and to the archives. Boundaries and border columns. I already mentioned that good fences make good neighbors. Catherine the Great knew that, and we all probably know that. And this relates to the boundaries and borders of the Malaysia Colony. So based on the laws of the new Russian gubernias, that's the district, they were supposed, district inhabitants with travel passports, Based on the laws of the new Russian gubernias, the district office provides district inhabitants with travel passports and ensures that no foreigners reside in the districts without such passports. So we could say illegal immigration was already a topic back then. And that had to be maintained. That was at the borders. They kept their borders. The district office ensures that the order is maintained in the villages, that all roads and bridges are kept in an orderly condition. The district office takes measures against contagious illnesses when they occur. Shall we comment on that one? But we do know that they blocked the roads. All the roads in and out of the colony were blocked. There were guards set up during the time of quarantine there. And, point 15, the district office maintains exterior borders of the district in an orderly manner, and in general ensures that there are no causes for disputes between neighbors in this regard. And that was part of the point of the original 1830s map, was to make sure there were no disputes. So let's look at what those, recently I discovered what those boundaries and border columns would look like. And I got some information again from Conrad Stace from the archives. And here is, in this corner we can see a detailed drawing to scale of what the border column, what the post looked like at the entrance to the Malaysia Colony. There were two of these. We can read there was one on the north end and one on the south end. There was a main road coming through, and interestingly enough, there was a plaque positioned under the symbol of the two clasped hands. The plaque read, "Land of the Mennonite Brotherhood." And in 1906 it says, "Wealthy travelers on their way to the Crimea often stopped in their carriages and looked at the pillar and read the inscription." So we can see it was a massive column, and we're able to recreate these because of information that's in the archives. And this map, here we have a little extract from the map again here. The column would have been right around here this little, I don't know what it is, if it's a horn, but it indicates that it's a post road. So this was the post road coming into Altona, and right around here, it may even indicate the place of that column, but I can't say for sure, was where this column with the clasped hands stood. And along this post road, as I know some of us have done research on the post road around here, they put up columns. They put columns to indicate the verst markers, or a verst is about a kilometer. And again, I'm looking at some of the comments Johan Corny's made about these roads. The post road along the Malashna, along the river, deserves particular mention. Much work has been expended to make it smoother. Using clay soil, the district office arranged to have the road through Munsterberg village turned into a major road for about 1,800 feet. It said, or as far as the blowing sand extended, which requires 25,000 loads of clay. So they were building roads back then with 25,000 loads of clay. So we can imagine, likely these same Chumak traders were hauling for days and weeks, bringing these loads of clay to make this road better. And then he mentions that there are going to be some verse markers put up there. It said only 7 have been completed. We're in 1837. Only 7 have been completed. The other 26 markers will be produced. And it says they make the road very attractive. And by 1838, it talks about planting trees along the road. This will prevent travelers from losing their way, beautify our villages, and render the region through which the road passes more pleasant. So we're planting trees, we're putting up these mileposts, and then it says the landholders were obligated to construct these verse posts. So what do these verse posts look like? Well, that same archival drawing gives us a really good picture of that. We have another scale drawing of what a verse post looks like. And again, just to get a picture of the detail of the administration of the colony, there was these were put up every verst along this post road, and it had the name of the colony in Russian and in German, and how many men and how many women lived there. So that's when it was by village. It wasn't always by village, but so it's really impressive, and it had the number of the verst on it. So based on these drawings, we're able to create a virtual picture of the size of these. So every kilometer, there was a column like this put up. So that was a bit of work to install and maintain. And now, by looking at this map, it's a little bit small on my screen here, let's see. Well, here's a column. Yeah, here's a column. Oh yeah, there we can see number 2. So they started at this end, and all the way up this postal road, we can actually see this map shows the individual verst columns. So it's incredibly detailed, and there's lots remaining to be discovered on this map. This is just my initial look at it. But again, going to the archives, we heard about this road being expanded. Now here we can see a road with clay and built on the chornozem, the soil they had there. So we can even see a detailed drawing of what the roads through there, how they were likely constructed, with ditches on either side, and here we can see the trees along the road. If we look up here, it's those are rows of trees, individual trees along there. And now I chose to look closely at 2 villages, Fischau and Schönau. And these villages are of particular importance to me as a member of the Holdeman Church with background in the Kleingemeinde. So these villages, especially Fischau, was a very important village for the Holdeman Church. It's interesting how many people came out of there that ended up to as important leaders in the Holdeman Church. So we have Heinrich Entz, and I'm going to focus on someone else here, Abe G. Entz. So lots of the Holdemans came from the Kleingemeinde, as many of us are familiar with. We have there was this sort of division, or a bunch of the Kleingemeinde joined the Holdeman. But not only. In Inman, Kansas, there was another man from Fischau, Gerhard Entz, with a son, Abraham Entz. And Abe Entz became probably one of the most popular, well-known Holdeman preachers. And he was not from the Kleine, so it's interesting how that he moved to the States and there joined the Holdemans and became a well-known preacher, but not with Kleine roots. And here we can see a newspaper article from the time of his funeral in, you know what, I don't have a date there, I think the 30s. And it says funeral draws 1,800 people. And so we can see he was an important preacher. And my great-great-grandfather, Jacob T. Wiebe, from this area, but his roots were in Schönau. He would have been a lot younger then, but he preached at that funeral. So he traveled to Inman and preached at Abe Ence's funeral. And it's just interesting, the connection, how their villages were close. But what does this map tell us about villages? As researchers start to look at these maps, what can they find? Well, we can see many details. Of course, the individual houses. Here's the count of the house and the count of the lots in Fischau. And so some of this I've taken off other maps that were drawn much later, but I can see they haven't changed a lot. Here's the same windmill, here's the night watchman's house, a herdsman's house. There was a cloth dyeing factory here that later turned into a church. Here's the wetlands, and across the wetlands we'll see they built a different style of road. Not with trees along it, but they had a different style of road here for handling the drainage. Here's the cemetery. That cemetery is still there today. You can travel right there. If we were to look at a map of Fischau though, and we would see the Mennonites drew it, down in this area here, we would see two straight rows like this, and then houses on each side. And instead here on this Russian map, we just see kind of a motley collection of houses. And we'll see that again and again as we compare these Russian maps to the English ones, or the Mennonite ones. We'll see things just lose their straightness. Same thing up here. And then we travel up this road to Schönau. We can see the main houses. We can count them off and give them numbers and figure out, if we can figure out the numbering system, who lived there. So it's very possible you could figure out on a map which house is your ancestor's house. We can see factories, again, dyeing factories. So maybe we don't think of our ancestors, how much they were into cloth dyeing. But between these two villages, we can see two cloth dyeing factories. Here we have the wealthy Hermanet's brick factory, brick and tile factory. And in there, in one of the descendants' diary, they write about this Kleinerstrasse. So here's the little street, and this is where the poor people lived. And it was known as, of course, she described it as living on the wrong side of the tracks. So this is where the wealthy Hermanet's factory was, and they would have lived in the center area of the village, the old and full Wirtschafts, the lots. And here was a little street known as the Kleinerstrasse. Here we have, one other most important from Fischau was Peter P. Taves, of course, I shouldn't forget him, but to the Oldemans, he was the most important Kleine connection by far. He was one of the bishops. And this is a picture of him, his brother Cornelius. They both joined the Holdemans. And when we look at these woods here, we can read what Peter Taves said about them in 1874. Just before he moved to Canada, he came and visited his old hometown. He'd moved away, but he came back, and he says how the following morning I went into the woods in order to refresh myself from the journey. These were the woods which my father had planted in his time. I passed back and forth. Many a tree was still completely familiar to me, as if I had never gone. So that's kind of a touching account of, what this village meant to Peter P. Taves, and this map is sort of a tribute to that. And now we're going to move on past that map, look at a couple more pictures. This is a picture, again, from Russian archives of a Mennonite house barn. So what do the Russians say about the Mennonite house barn? This is a detailed drawing. Each room has a number and it has descriptions on it. And again, interestingly, it says the house barn design is not ideal because of the fire risk it presents. However, the Mennonites are very careful and fires are extremely rare. This plan presents a very nice system as a whole and deserves special attention. So it's a nice objective review of our architecture. It said it's not ideal, but if we're careful, it's a really useful plant. And this is, again, my picture of based completely on that plan. That's the size of building that would have been. It's based on that plan. I think Maria helped with this picture. It's supposed to represent, so across the yard is where the grandfather or parents could live in a little house. There was permission made for that. And so this is supposed to represent FOSPA at like the grandma's house. We're looking across the yard. We're set up for a Sunday afternoon FOSPA. Here's another picture of a village scene. We'll just go through that. These are pictures I've made. So they're attempting to be quite realistic. This is an example of windmills, which were extremely important. Sometimes we forget just how many windmills. We imagine the big Dutch-style windmills, but in fact, a lot of villages just had these, earlier ones had these post-style windmills. And if you look at a picture of a Ukrainian village, you might see up to 30 or 40 or more windmills in one village. So the Mennonite villages, as far as I know, didn't have that many, but windmills were not just like, you know, quaint decor to the village. They were an essential part of life. And in the foreground here, this is a chumak cart. This is the type of carts they made. We can see the heavy, they were designed for heavy loads with braces from the box to the axle. And after this, we're going to look at Russian art again, the same Ivazolski, and combining my two favorite topics here. We can see the steppe with the wheat, and we can see the same style of windmill, this pole style. The whole windmill rotates, not just the top. But if you need to turn it into the wind, what I mean is you can, like, of course there's the part that turns, but the whole windmill can be rotated to face the wind the right way. And we see the chumak traders here, just a couple of them, moving through the Russian steppe, or the Ukrainian steppe. And again, my picture of a post-style windmill. This shows a little better how they were sitting on a column right here and how they could be rotated. They'd often have wheels here, so if you would hook a horse onto there and pull, you'd get the windmill to turn, the building to turn, so that it was facing the wind the right way. Here's an interior scene. We won't dwell on that long. It just shows the normal features of a well-kept Mennonite house. With, of course, here I show a later Tsar, but many of them had the picture of the Tsar on the wall. And another short animation. I make these pictures to try to hopefully convey some of the feeling of, well, the size and the space and what it looked like. This one shows the well that was often in the center of a yard. Just some more pictures showing some of the tools. And we often focus on the tragedy of how the Mennonite story in Ukraine ended, but I like to think about some of the decades of good times that were had there too. So with this, that's the end of my presentation. I wanted to give special thanks to of course, the Eastman Historical Committee, well, numerous places here at the museum, Conrad Stace, the Plett Foundation, Ernest Braun, Arnold Neufeld-Fast, many others who have encouraged me, and I have to mention my family. I have a wife and young children, and there's a reason that most of the historians wait till they're older to get into this. It's a real sacrifice for them. I've been gone a lot, spent a lot of time, so I especially want to thank them. But thanks again to everybody for listening.
you, Brent. Incredible. I'm old school. I can't even think digitally. We have time for some questions and answers, hopefully. Brent is prepared to respond to that. Are there any questions that come to mind? And while you're thinking of that, one question comes to my mind, and that is about the three roses. I'm involved with the Kruger Clock Foundation, and one of the things that you see about Kruger clocks is that they have three roses on the clock. Any connection?
I have no idea. That's the truth.
Of course, the village that
I can comment. So what I do know about the name Three Roses, it has nothing to do with clocks, but it could be related. But there was actually a tavern, and it still is in existence, near Rosenort, East Prussia, that is called Three Roses. And then one of the Facebook users have also told me of a small place in Nebraska, I think. It was locally known as the Three Roses, but they were from the Malaysia Colony as well.
All right, thank you. I know we have just about received as much information as our brains can process, but are there questions? Yes? Okay, can you maybe come to the mic so we can hear you? Oh, you can.
I was just going to ask about this H. Dirks journal. Henry Dirks, and is it available? The references rated by
Okay.
The question was regarding a journal by H. Dirks, and my memory is such that I don't necessarily even know, but anything I've had here is available, and I'm going to just look for which ones you're talking about. Oh, H. Dirks. So it's available online. I don't know the story of it, but whatever I took is publicly available online. It's in German and available online, so I can get you that information.
Were these maps you found online, the newest maps, or were they in archives somewhere in Moscow or Russia?
They were in archives, and so I only found them through social media. It's not like I was, I'm not a discoverer, but I found a guy that was researching them, and I bought them from him. So they're not publicly available yet. But I will soon have them available on my website for it'll be like a Google Maps style environment where you can look for a village and then zoom in, and they'll soon be available for free viewing by anyone. I believe they're from the Moscow, the Russian State Military Archives. I think that's in Moscow.
Some of our Mennonite people did not come from the Zaporozhye region, but came from the western Volhynia region. Have you done any work in that area?
So I've looked into it, and there are some good maps available from that area, especially that same series that, no, I better be careful what I say. Anyways, these maps do not extend to there. This series does not extend quite to there. So I'm looking and I'm collecting maps on that, but I don't have anything like this yet on that.
Thank you.
And my wife's family comes from that area, so I'm interested in that too. I've been looking into that.
Any others? I don't want to prolong it, but maybe something can occur to you later. And yes?
The 700-year tree is gone?
It's there, and most of it's dead, but it has quite a large portion that's alive. Like, it's preserved. It doesn't look very great. It's preserved as a monument only, but it's not all dead. And part of it looks healthy.
All right? Yes?
That house had brick on it, and the way I understand it, 1885, somewhere they started building up brick walls.
They started building with brick a lot sooner than that. Yeah. I think Glenn Penner mentioned to me that, I want to be careful, 1830s were when the first fired brick structures appeared. The actual true fired brick structures appeared on the Malaysia Colony.
Okay, thank you. At this point, I'll call up Glenn Clausen. Thank you, Brent, for take time to answer our questions. Glenn will talk about the displays, and maybe I also mention how we will proceed from here with the pasta.
It's really nice to see all you here. We have this space till 4:30, so you can feel free to stick around till 4:30 or so, and you'll want to see some of the displays that are up around here, so I'll just go over a quick review of them. Over there you have Brent's maps, all of that side, and on the tables over there. Beautiful maps. I hope you spend time with them. We have the village of Neuendorf model in the middle there. That's courtesy of MHV. We lugged it down from the attic of the store yesterday for a display here. I hope you have a look at that. The Thiessens created that. Henry Thiessen, was it? Anyway. Then on the far table we have Jake Peters, the chairman of the Eastman Committee. He's also involved with MMHS, Manitoba Mennonite Historical Society, and he would encourage us, and I would encourage you to join the society if you are not a member yet. It costs you $20 a year. He's ready to take your name there and your payment if you've got it, or you can pay later sometime. And if there are any heritage postings left there, you can also pick one of the recent issue of Heritage Posting. As a member, you get 3 issues of Heritage Posting. This is a magazine of 12 to 16 pages, which has news about Mennonites in Manitoba. It has stories, interesting stories about us, and it has book reviews, and it's well worth the $20 for the three issues. So I hope you'll sign up for membership in the MMHS with Jake over there on the far table. Also on that table is a display of atlases, all kinds of atlases, most of them Mennonite-based atlases. Pick them up and look through them and talk to Jake about them, or to anybody who's there if you're interested. Then we have on the right there is Harold Dick. He's a member of the committee, and he has created a series of maps to tell the story of his family, where they lived, where they moved, and his family is actually an amalgam of people from 4 different colonies, from here, from West Reserve, from Swift Current, and from Hay Goslar, and he even has a Hutterite connection. So he's telling the story of his whole family on both sides using maps, and these maps he gets from various sources. So have a look and chat with him. Then next to him at that table is Darren Rempel from Winnipeg, and no, from Steinbach? Okay, sorry. And what he does is he models East Reserve villages where we are now, and based on Google Earth, you can fly into New Bothwell or to Shoinzay or whatever under his guidance. So he has a monitor there, and he'd be very happy for you to look at that and to discuss it with him. Finally, there's me. I have made those posters over there that are based on illustrations in the Historical Atlas of the East Reserve. So they are not exactly arranged like in the atlas. They bring together different graphics, maps. So have a look at those. You can order those for 15 bucks a crack. So those 16 by 24 posters are $15. The large one, which is 3 feet by 4 feet of the whole East Reserve, that one I'd have to charge you about $70 for. So if you want to order them, I'd be happy to receive your orders. Finally, I hope that you also visit the bookstore. They have a special cart there with books that are very relevant to the topic here today. So I hope you pay them a visit, buy a book or two, and finally, there is a table attended by Ed Cron, another member of our committee, and he'd be very happy to receive your donations for this event. It costs us about $1,200 to put this event on, so your help with that would be greatly appreciated. You can drop off your donations into the hat that Ed has put there. And I think that's all for me. Oh, yes. We have coffee and sweets, free for you. And it's in the multi-purpose room. You exit the auditorium, then to your left, the doors will be open to the multi-purpose room. Pick up, yes, Ed?
Perhaps you could also mention the care, what we're hoping to do next spring.
I couldn't hear that, Ed. Can you say it louder?
The care that we put up south of Nimmerville, and you talked a little about spring, we might have a fishbowl.
Okay, yes. The cairn that we put up near Niverville, 2 miles south of Niverville, to commemorate the immigration shed location, will be dedicated next spring on Manitoba Day. So be sure to be there. I think it has a very informative plaque on it. I made it myself, so it's good. Was that what you were advertising at? Good, thank you. Not really. Coffee and sweets out there in the multi-purpose room. You pick it up at the window and